Hi everyone. The painting that you see next to me is my most recent acrylic on-canvas landscape painting. It's based on a series of photographs that I took while visiting Kent Falls a few years ago. Kent Falls is located in Connecticut. And my new series of landscape paintings that I'm about to begin will be based on photographs that I took during my recent trip to the Canadian Rockies. The small watercolor painting that you watch me create in this video represents a study for one of these new large landscape paintings. And in the video, I'll guide viewers through every step of the watercolor painting process. In a landscape like this is Lake Louise in Banff, Alberta, Canada. And I'll begin with the sky and the water. That's the first thing I lay down. Reason why is the color of the sky is reflected in the surface of the water. First thing I like to do is dampen the sky. Notice how I work my brush. I'm not working the tip of the brush. I'm mopping it in on the side of the brush. Very important. I don't want to wear out the tip. Okay, so I've mopped in plain water to prepare the paper for the application of color. And for the sky, I'm going to apply cobalt blue. Always have your colors prepared in advance, even with quick sketching like this. You don't want to be working on your piece and all of a sudden realize you need a color that's not ready to go. And I think I'll work in some cerulean blue. Even when I mix my color, notice I don't put my brush in and go like that with the tip. If I'm using my good brush to mix up the quantity of color, I use the side of the brush. Okay, so we have cobalt blue and cerulean blue. Clean off my brush. Go back to my painting and begin to wash in graded wash of cobalt blue. Lightens as it gets to the horizon of the mountaintops. At this point, because the mountains diminish in detail because of atmospheric perspective, I can carry that wash down into the mountains. So I'm going to go back into my cobalt blue and pull some of that color down. I see a touch of the cerulean right about here. So I'm going to lay in the slightest hint of cerulean blue. Now I see what looks like a cloud in this area. So with a piece of tissue, it's kind of molded into a ball. I'm going to blot into it. I'm not pressing too much. Just want to lighten the area, lift out some color. That will achieve the effect. And a very high alto cirrus cloud, it looks like. Barely visible, but it's sort of in the bottom part of the sky. And I'm going to drag the dry cloth across. After I drag it across, I leave it alone. I'm not going to work back into it. I have enough confidence that the watercolor is going to do what it needs to do. Now, dropping down to the water, I'll dampen the water. And I see all kinds of interesting modulations in the water, modulations of color that I definitely want to capture. But the dominant color is the cerulean blue. And it's a very unreal looking cerulean blue because this is Lake Louise in Alberta, Canada. I actually went canoeing with my daughter across the lake. It was absolutely spectacular. The lake is glacier fed and loaded with what's called rock flour, pulverized, ground up rock to the density of flour has filtered into the lake because it's June and there's a lot of runoff of snow and glacier water from the mountain. And what that has done is given the color of the lake an unreal bluish tint. the blue works across. I drag it down into the dampened paper. I need a little yellow ochre right down here. What happens is it approaches the shore that I'm standing on. The water becomes shallow, and you're seeing the golden rocks underneath. Now, the key to making all this work is not to intentionally blend your colors. I think I say this in the flower paintings too. Don't force the blending. Let the blending occur on its own. So this area over here, where the blue touches the golden colors underneath, I'm establishing a basic color area at this point to be worked in with additional detail. But I don't blend. I allow the blending to occur on its own. At this stage, I have to let it dry, and we'll return to it in a few minutes. Now that the sky and the water are dry, at least the first washes are dry, I'm going to continue to develop the mountains and begin with the most distant ones. The first thing I need to do is study the mountain carefully. Let's look at our photo. And I analyze the colors and the values that I see here and mix the absolute lightest color that I see and begin to lay in all my details using that lightest color. When the lightest color dries, then I start working in my darker details. So to mix that light color, I'm going to use as a base my yellow ochre. There is quite a bit of yellow ochre in that area, but it's toned down with some blue. I hope I don't get green from doing that. No, that's good. That is good. I have a grayish ochre. That's exactly what I wanted. I carefully study the photo and begin to render the detail that I see. I accidentally went into a background mountain. I didn't want to do that, so I'm going to lift out a little of that color there. That's no big deal. Continue down. This mountain sort of slopes this way. I'll be able to repair that. And I'm trying to dance around with my brush in such a way as to leave the snow relatively white. Because this is my sketch pad, I'll also work into the snow with a Signo permanent white pen. I would never do that in a larger piece. In a larger piece, I would mask out all my whites. I'll show you something very cool. I didn't plan on doing this, but I happen to have it next to me, and I think you'll enjoy seeing it. I mentioned that I just accidentally went beyond the area I wanted to go beyond with this. I can leave it alone and paint right over it. It's actually no big deal. But if I wanted to remove it, one effective way is with an airbrush, 20 pounds per square inch, and just water. And I'll air erase that little mishap and then blot it up. The beauty of doing that is I don't at all damage the paper by scrubbing into it. The air is very gentle. It'll remove the paint much more thoroughly than any other way and absolutely leave the paper alone. Anyway, let's let that dry and then I'll continue. I actually would like to work in some blue shade to suggest the look of what I see in the photo. With a very light wash of cobalt blue, I'm applying a second wash of color into this area, paraphrasing what's happening with the shadows that I actually see in the photograph. And the snow down there begins to take on a bluish tint. It's beautiful, absolute beautiful color. And there are some wonderful little shadows that work their way into this area. I'd like to start to add them. And what I often do in my watercolor to work into the water and capture the subtle colors that are going on, with a wet brush, create squiggles of dampness that sort of suggest the patterns I see on the surface of the water. I want to apply a little cerulean blue because the color of this lake is unbelievable. And I do the same motion, that same squiggly motion, and I drag it into the dampened area so it effectively diffuses and blends away naturally. As I come down, I'm adding more water now, and I just want to fade out this detail. I have a beautiful little ripply thing going on there. And there's another one. So I'll come in with some of that cerulean blue. The beauty of watercolor is it's unique in its ability to paraphrase the look of nature. So as long as you don't overwork the material, the natural color interactions that watercolor does will effectively communicate the look of your water surface. Okay, less is more. I'm leaving that alone until I get more development going on up here. I just wanted to show you how I would do that. I also have all kinds of little rocks and stuff under the water that I'm going to want to add. Now going back to this area, I'm going to take a little ultramarine blue and add that to my ochre because I want to gray it down. And then I'm going to use this grayed down color to continue to develop the mountain. Cobalt blue and ultramarine blue are wonderful colors to use for graying down colors and creating shadows. Okay. Studying the photo carefully, I begin to work in, suggest. I'm not copying. I'm suggesting the look. And right now I'm locked in on shadows I see. The Rocky Mountains are characterized by sedimentary formations. The Rockies are actually an uplifting of an ancient seabed because of the collision of continental shelves. So if you were fossil hunting in the Rockies, you could probably find clam shells and all kinds of ancient sea creatures. Fascinating subject. But because of its sedimentary layering, you can see the linear elements, the horizontal bands, and sometimes those horizontal bands become very vertical because of the violence of the uplifting that occurred in their formation. And I want to keep this area very light and non-contrasty because of atmospheric perspective. Atmospheric perspective is created by the intervening mass of atmosphere between you, where you're standing, and the distant scenes that you're looking at. The more air, the more dust particles, the more water vapor, sometimes the more pollution, and it diminishes the detail and color intensity that you could see. Some more gray for this lower area. I began with my lighter color as a general wash, and then I began to introduce darker values to establish more detail. Now, this large wall of rock has a lot of warm colors in it. It's closest in the foreground. Notice as the mountains recede into the background, they begin to take on a cooler tonality, and this distant one is dominated by cool colors. It warms up a little bit here. And as you'll see, it gets more contrasty as we move into the foreground. So I'm going to take my grayed light color and just wash that in right now to create some of the lightest values. There are some patches of snow on this side. I'm going to use the Signal pen to create them. I'm ignoring them right now. Just want to tone it down. I even see some pinks, so I think I'm going to take a little Winsor red. Very light washes in this case. Colors are almost anemic, but I'm doing that on purpose. I just want to get hints of color onto my watercolor paper that I see in the actual photo. Light, delicate stains. I even see hints of the Winsor red here, so why not? I'll wash it in. I'm not going to carry it up any further. I'm going to leave it right down there. And it's mostly covered by the pine tree in front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest the background mountains using a little bit of my grayed blue color. I'm going to add a little bit more cobalt blue to this gray color because I think it's appropriate. And it's barely visible, but it is there, and I think it is significant. I'm using a mixture of ochre, yellow ochre, and cobalt blue here for my gray. But more often, I prefer to use burnt sienna and either cobalt or ultramarine. That produces a beautiful gray color. And I'm going to add a little of that burnt sienna in there right now. Yeah. Now we want to cool it down and gray it down with a little bit of the cobalt. That is a nice gray. Continue to articulate the rock, trying to suggest the absolute ruggedness of this landscape. What happens is, as the rock moves down into the lower levels, trees and green things, bushes start to kick in. This area is all above the tree line. All of this is above the tree line. So I would say it's about 6,000 plus feet, if not higher. It's fascinating the way you get the horizontal striations, and then you got a lot of vertical markings and deep shadows. Some warmer browns poke into this area in a very nice way. I think it's important when you go out to paint landscape to learn about the area that you're painting. Research, study the geology, and get to know why the formations are happening. I believe it's important to be an informed landscape painter. Before I get too crazy in all of this, I'd like to establish some of the green areas too, because they play a significant compositional role in what I'm doing here. This is a green that I've had mixed on this tiny little palette. And what is it? It's a combination of cobalt blue and Winsor yellow. The green can be toned down just a little bit with burnt sienna. Yeah, that's the green I want. But what I want to add is I don't stick with one color of green. I usually work into it with yellows and darker greens. So I'm going to do that as I go along. And I pay careful attention to the type of stroke that I'm going to be using. And I think I'm going to start down here, actually. Okay, I'm going to try to stroke it up. As I apply a few dabs, I'm going into my blue again. I know. I want to create transitions that suggest the natural tonal variations that occur in the landscape. Clean out my brush, go into a little of the Winsor yellow, get it down anywhere that I can put it that's clean. Hey, let's see what happens when I mix it with some cerulean blue. Nice. Your Winsor yellow is a good yellow to mix greens with. And depending on what blue you mix, you get all kinds of variations in the green. And what I want are all kinds of interesting tonal shifts and color shifts, suggesting what happens naturally. Some ultramarine blue would be a good way to darken this. Just strokes, vertical strokes to suggest the trees. Back into my Winsor yellow and back into this area because I see the cerulean blue is very close to some of these shrubby things that seem to coexist with the pine trees. I don't know exactly what they are. It's a green shrubby bush. I would imagine occasionally a bear likes to work its way up there and sort of munch on them. Kind of like a salad. Darker greens. I don't see any aspen at all in this area. We're just too high. Heavy shadow in this area, so I'm going to use my cobalt blue for the shadow. And before I get into any rock detail, I'm simply going to lay in the cobalt blue shadow area. More of the gray burnt sienna mix with the cobalt blue and a little bit of the ultramarine blue thrown in there. Work that right down to the shoreline. Remember, I'm not copying, I'm paraphrasing. Lots of yellow ochre right over here. I don't know what's going on, what that's a result of. Too far away for me to be able to see it when I was actually there. But it's a wonderful color accent for that area. Toning down the white of the snow-capped mountain. See all kinds of wonderful rock formations here. I had another mountaintop that I wanted to work in right about there. And it's not as blue, it's slightly grayed more so. Picking up some of that color, that mixed gray of cobalt blue and burnt sienna. And I'll throw it in. Good. Deep shadow areas. The more contrast you establish between shadow and highlight, the more effective and dimensional your painting will become. To do these fine linear striations, I do work with the tip of my brush. I need to tone down these rock walls. Some of this beautiful brown. Actually, driving through the Rockies, in the higher altitudes, brown is a color that I saw lots of. See how I play with the detail? I dance around, I look at the photo and study the contrasts between light and dark, gradually work into them. This area is full of small boulders, definitely a rocky beach. And there are even patches of snow that I could see right along the edge of the water. The greens in this area are very dulled and grayed, so I am gonna adjust my green here with neutral tint. And having done that, I'll begin to suggest the green. The edge of the mountain is characterized by a broken line of dark pine trees that occasionally picks up more saturated green color right about there. Nice. So I continue to use that method of brushing in various intensities of color in this staccato-like fashion. I don't want it to look too regular. This is the challenge. You want to have these staccato brush strokes, but you want them to retain an irregular feeling as if they were created by nature. And even when I look into what at first appears dark and uncolored, as I study it, I start to see subtle hints of other colors, and for me that's a very important element. I always look for subtle hints and then I paint them. So what am I saying? I'm saying don't look at a color and see it simply as one color. Look at a color and try to discern all of the subtle nuance of tone and color that give it variety and richness, and work that into your painting. That's primarily turned into a grayed green, and into that I add my yellow to pick up the green a little bit more. And a hint, if you have lamp black or neutral tint, or even Payne's gray, you mix that with your yellow, Winsor yellow or Aureolin yellow, and you can make absolutely beautiful greens. So you don't need to combine yellow and blue to make green. You can use black to make green.
Tomorrow we'll sit by the sea.
Shaft of light must be hit in this area. Subtle greens, subtle browns, very beautiful.
And we'll be gone. But we were here once, and that will always be.